Hello, folks, and welcome back. In this next section, we're going to be talking about how we can modify elements within document object model. So let's just head back to the web page I made earlier, this very simple fan page for Radiohead, one of my favorite bands. So I've added an image element into here at the moment as well. And if we just check out the code in VS Code, I've got example.js, which we talked about earlier, for index.html, now with an image element inside of here as well. I've got this asset, which is this JPEG image, which is being rendered in the browser. I've also added a style.css file for styling purposes, and I've created a class. The name I've given to this class is .album __ list item. And what we're going to see shortly is how we can apply this class to some of the elements within the DOM using JavaScript. Okay, first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do the following. So first of all, I'm going to say, given that we have a collection of LIs, we have a node list, what I would like to do is I would like to go through each list item and update the inner text. So I'm going to go through each list item and update the inner text. So one thing I'm going to do first is just make this variable name slightly clearer, because sometimes it gets a bit confusing when you just use plurals like this. So I'm going to actually call this album list, based on the fact that this is a list of list items that we have in the DOM. So we saw earlier, we can iterate through the album list. So I could say for const of album list, and then I can do some logic in here, do something with each li. And before I called this an album, I'm actually going to suggest in this next section that actually I think a more appropriate variable name would be to call this an album li, just to make it clearer that this is an object from the DOM tree. That's why I've changed the name here. So just one last time, I've changed that to be album li, just to make this variable name clearer, so that it indicates that this is a DOM object that we're dealing with here. There are other naming conventions as well that I'll leave you to go out and think about. So this might not be the best one, but we're going to work with it for the time being. We can always update it later on. So const album li of album list. So what is this something we want to do each time? Well, in this, we would like to say, update the inner text to be something else, just for the purpose of this example. So at the moment, the inner text is Pablo Honey, The Bends, OK Computer, Kid A, Hail to the Thief, Amnesiac, so on and so forth. How about we update the inner text for these LIs? Okay, so let's just inspect before we go ahead and do that. So body, we've got section, and then we've got each of these LIs, and we can see the inner text for each of these li elements here. Okay, let's see if we can update the inner text. So it's going to be taking the album li, accessing the inner text property, and then updating the object or mutating the object. So we can use the assignment operator and then assign this to be a string, say hello world, and then save. So what I'm doing is I'm saying go to the album li object, access its inner text property, and then reassign that to be this new string. Okay, so this is how we can update a DOM object. And once we've done that, when this script executes, we can see that it's now updated in the browser as well. So this is the kind of thing we could do if we wanted to go through a collection of elements or a collection of DOM objects and then update them somehow. We're simply updating or mutating the object and changing its property. Cool. So how about something else then? How about, for example, now suppose I wanted to do the following. I suppose I wanted to go through each album li and apply a class to each item. Okay, so this is the kind of standard thing you often want to do when you're working with JavaScript and CSS in a web page, is that sometimes you may want to use JavaScript to turn a class on or to apply a class to a particular set of elements. Okay, so I'm going to do a more straightforward example to illustrate how we could do this so you can see. So again, as before, I want to loop through const album, and in fact, I'm going to remove this loop now. Do this. So we're going to go through each album li. And of album list. And what I'm going to say in here, we want to apply an album. So album li. And then we've got a bunch of options down here when we do dot once again. But the thing we're interested in this time is something called class list. And indeed, if I log class list, let's just see what that gives us, which is a property of each album li. So let's have a look and see what this returns. We'll see what this output gives us. Cool. So we get value, empty string, value, empty string, value, empty string, value, empty string, etc. So what class list is it in the list of all the different classes that have been applied to each album li. And so what this is effectively telling us is that for these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 LIs, every single one of them has no class at the moment attached to it. Okay, so what we want to do is update this class list so that we have a particular class in here. How do we do that? Well, what we can do is we can go further onto class list, and then we can go dot again, and we find that there is another method attached to class list called the add method. Cool, and this is a function, and then if we invoke this, we can see what it gets. It says adds all arguments passed. So whenever we call the add function with here is going to get added into the class list for this particular album list item. Okay, so whatever we pass in here is going to be added to the class. So let's pass in a string here. And now this is the point where I can go back to the style.css file and note that in here I've got a style class, or a CSS class, I should say, of album __ list dash item. So I can copy that class name and just pop that in here. Cool. And save. So the way to think of this is saying, go to the album li element, access its class list, and then add to the class list this particular class here, which is inside the style.css. Awesome. Now then, one thing to note in my index.html is that I have a script element here, which is linking the HTML file to the JavaScript example.js. And I also have a link element. And this link element has a href, which points to style.css. So this is how we're linking the index.html file to our style sheet. So it's very important that you remember to keep that link in. Otherwise, you're not going to see these two things linked together. Cool. Now, if we head back to our page, lo and behold, we can see that that class, which was like 1 pixel border, has been applied to each element. If I go back again, and if I now console log class list, album li class list, now what we see is this DOM token list, which again looks slightly like an array, but not quite an array. But inside here, each time we're seeing a class that has been applied to those list item elements. Awesome. So what we've seen here is how we can mutate DOM objects to update what is rendered on the page. And in particular, we've seen how we can use the class list and the add method to add classes to existing elements in the DOM. And this is going to be very, very useful when you come to work on some of the projects that you'll be looking at in the next few weeks. Awesome. Okay, well, I'm going to pause there and I will see you in the next section.